I was raised in a household and a culture that leaned heavily toward conservative politics and conservative religion. But you would be wrong to stereotype my upbringing as something straight out of Gone with the Wind or Deliverance. Even though I was raised in the waning days of the Jim Crow South and my parents never seriously questioned that culture, I would have been in big trouble with them as well as the rest of the adults in my life if I had ever mistreated any African American or treated one with disrespect. Even though I was raised in the Southern Baptist Church, I was expected to read the Bible for myself and raise whatever issues arose for me. I like to say I was raised as a fundamentalist, but with a small f. All of that began to change when I was a freshman in college. During that year, I realized that God was calling me into ministry as a career. And in my case, that realization was actually a kind of dramatic Damascus Road sort of experience. I felt a rootedness afterwards and a hopefulness that filled me with joy. By my sophomore year, however, I had garnered just enough knowledge about the Bible to make me dangerous. And I was convinced that I had cornered the market on truth. My 19-year-old expertise had decided that everybody who disagreed with me was wrong and was doomed to an eternity in perdition. The Bible says it, I believe it, and that settles it, was my motto. God, was I insufferable. And then one day I was at home waxing eloquent on the unrighteousness of others who had strayed from the straight and narrow way, and my mother finally got a snootful of it all. And in her genteel Southern Baptist voice, she said, "Paris, you have lost all the joy of your salvation." I can't tell you how painfully those words stung me. Mostly because in my heart I knew they were true. I was so concerned with getting things right that I had sucked all the wonder and all the laughter out of life and out of my faith. In the process of making sure everybody followed the rules, I'd become a real jerk. Some of you might think that things haven't changed much. Well, if so, at least I've got company. Our nation has become divided into ideological camps that broach no disagreement. Each side is sure it's right, whether the issues be political or religious or social or whatever, and we've lost all the joy of being Americans, we've lost all the joy of life, and we Christians have lost all the joy of our salvation. We have succumbed to the fundamentalism of the right as well as fundamentalism of the left. We insist on the rules being followed, and many of us have become real jerks about it. Jesus was once approached by a rabbinical scribe who wanted to do everything right, and so he asked Jesus, which commandment is the greatest one of them all? Now, this was no idle question. The rabbis had identified more than 600 commandments in the Hebrew Bible, so ferreting out the greatest one of all was no small feat. I mean, we have rules to follow here, so tell us the protocol. We have commandments to obey. We have orthodoxy to defend. We have right behavior to correct, right behavior to reward, and incorrect behavior to punish. So Jesus answered the scribe by quoting a part of today's reading from Deuteronomy. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength." Well, the scribe thought that was a pretty good answer, but Jesus wasn't finished. He went on to say there's a second commandment, and it's just as important as the first one. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Well, the scribe was impressed, and he said so. And Jesus told him, you're not far from the kingdom of God. Now, we have to be honest and admit that putting those two commandments, love God and love your neighbor, putting those two commandments wasn't an original thought with Jesus. Other rabbis had said the same thing before, so he wasn't really saying anything new here. But the question is then, so how come the other religious elites didn't praise Jesus? How come the vast majority of them opposed him? How come they took counsel to bump him off? How come many of those folks who shouted, crucify him on Good Friday were the very same folks who tried their best to keep those same commandments? What gives? They remind me of the good, righteous lady who never missed a Sunday in church and who looked out one Sunday afternoon and saw her neighbor mowing his lawn, and indignant she marched herself outside and shouted above the din of the mower, "You're breaking the Sabbath. You're not supposed to be cutting grass on the Sabbath." And the neighbor, who knew his Bible as well as she did, said, "Yes, but Jesus picked corn on the Sabbath." And the old lady said, "Two wrongs don't make a right." She kept the commandments, but she acted like a jerk. Evidently, just following the rules won't keep you from becoming a pain in the posterior. So I was intrigued by a quote from the late Marcus Borg, who said it would be better to use the word relationship in the passage instead of the word commandment. Yes, the actual word in the Hebrew and the Greek is translated commandment, but the English word relationship captures the meaning much better. The entire passage from Deuteronomy, from which Jesus drew part of his answer to the scribe, suggests an intimacy that goes far beyond following the letter of the law. Did you hear it? Deuteronomy says, "Keep these words that I am commanding you in your heart. Recite them to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're away, when you lie down and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Bind them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." In other words, these are words you feel more than hear, experience more than obey. Hearing and obeying are great, but that's only the beginning. It's a relationship more than just a commandment. What's the greatest relationship? Loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And which relationship ranks right up there with the first one? Loving your neighbor as yourself. You can keep the commandments and still be a jerk. But you can't be in a meaningful relationship that lasts and still be a jerk. The closer the relationship, the more each party starts taking on the characteristics of the other. You can't follow the commandments and still ignore, you can follow the commandments and still ignore God and your fellow human beings, but you can't be in a relationship with either one and just look out for yourself. You know, the longer that Penny and I are together, the more I notice Sicilian and Southern sayings creeping into both our respective speech patterns. I've learned how to say "ciao, Bella" with the best of them. When I've had more of a situation than I can tolerate anymore, I've learned to shout "basta" and turn around and leave the room. Whenever I hear some blowhard on TV or radio pontificating on a subject he knows nothing about, I'll hear myself "stupitagina." And Lord help me if I mispronounce and say it ricotta instead of ricotta, or Penny's maiden name saying as Bonadonna instead of Bonadonna. Sounds much better that way anyway. Likewise, I've heard Penny refer to two or more people as y'all. She's learned never to apply it just to one person. I've heard her tell me to go fetch something from out of the other room. When she's leaving the house in a hurry, she might say, "Well, we're off like a prom dress." She's even learned the civilized way to insult somebody. "He sure is ugly, bless his heart." Now, by contrast, one time Penny and I were at her sister's house, and as we were leaving, I said, "Well, let's put an egg in our shoe and beat it." Next time that my sister-in-law and brother-in-law were at our house, as they were leaving, my brother-in-law said, "Let's put an egg in our pants and beat it." Just give it up, Bob. See, you learn speech patterns and behavior patterns through relationships, not commands, not by insisting on the other one get it right. It's the same everywhere. I can't command you to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, but I can help you develop a relationship with God that will have that result. I can't command you to love your neighbor as yourself, but I can help you develop a relationship with your neighbor that will accomplish that. In these days when all we seem to be able to do is shriek at one another and demand that those other guys think like we do because our way is the right way, could we all just learn to think more in terms of relationships instead of commands? Feeling what's right more than defining what's right, more than just crossing every T and dotting every I like everybody else. Sure, there are commandments to follow. Yes, there are laws to obey. Yes, there are norms to respect. But the people who make a difference in this world are the ones who care more about relationships than rules. And what's the greatest relationship of all? Loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second greatest relationship is just as important. Loving your neighbor as yourself. Penny gave me permission to tell you that when her family immigrated here from Sicily, they worked hard to make a life here. And they also worked hard to become citizens of the United States. As soon as that goal was accomplished, they set about bringing over as many of their Sicilian family members as they could. Penny says her childhood was peppered with Sicilian relatives crowding into their little house with only one bathroom for weeks or months at a time. Somehow they made it work as one by one her aunts and uncles and cousins got settled in this new land. But when Penny was in the 6th grade, her mother suffered a serious, major heart attack. It was questionable for a while whether she would pull through, but somehow she did. But she was never quite well after that. In fact, she suffered several more heart attacks over the ensuing years, one of which happened close to the end of Penny's 8th grade year in school. Again, the outcome was questionable. Again, she somehow pulled through. And again, the day was set for her to come home from the hospital. The only problem was that this time, the day that her mom was to come home from the hospital was the same day as Penny's graduation from 8th grade. The ceremony was taking place that day. So, of course, neither her mother or her father could attend. Her sister Rosalie was able to rearrange her schedule to attend along with her Aunt Joanne, newly arrived from Sicily, who sat through the ceremony hardly understanding a word of it. And when it was over, several of her friends were having graduation parties and invited Penny to come. Penny got excited, and when she got home, she asked her dad if she could go. He said, "No, your mother just came home from the hospital. Your place is here. That's the right thing to do." Penny was devastated. As happy as she was to see her mother home, everything else about the day had been a colossal disappointment. Some celebration, she thought to herself. Well, at about that time, her Uncle Andy, Joanne's husband, got off work for the day and he stopped by a local grocery store. He saw a beautifully frosted layer cake in the bakery shop and he bought it, and he waltzed through the door of Penny's house with this large white box in his hands, plopped it on the table, opened it up and said, "Let's celebrate Penny's graduation from 8th grade." And they did. They sliced up that cake, passed pieces around, congratulated Penny on a job well done. Penny was so happy, so touched by her uncle's thoughtfulness that she didn't even care that the words on the cake read, "Happy birthday." Which of course her uncle couldn't read. But Penny didn't care. Somebody had cared enough to make a difference in her life. A difference she has never, ever forgotten. At the end of the day, it wasn't the right action that mattered as much as it was honoring the relationship. So I don't really care about the greatest commandment. I care about the greatest relationship. Loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And loving your neighbor as yourself. Period. End of story. Amen.